Ready to challenge what you think? Every week on Rise Radio Podcast, we ignite powerful dialogue about belief, social narratives, prophecies, and spirituality. Grounded in biblical apologetics with expert guests, bold questions, and unexpected insights. We aim to contextualize our culture and bring clarity. This isn't about small talk. It's big questions answered. Rise Radio Podcast. Let the truth rise.
Well, hello everyone and welcome to today's episode of Rise Radio. We have Craig Dehut with us, and he's the co-founder of Appian Media. Welcome to the show, Craig.
Thank you for having me.
It's really a pleasure to have you because I know that you have had so many experiences, making these documentaries, which, by the way, are really good. I recommend people to check them out. They're such a good resource for people who are searching for the truth. Basically, Craig and his team, they visit real biblical sites across the world, and they show people in these engaging documentaries kind of what's there and the history of the Bible. So, Craig, could you take us through some of your favourite places that you've seen that really proves the Bible is real history?
Sure. It's almost like asking me which of my children is my favorite. My favorite locations always kind of seem to change based on where we've recently been. But I've been blessed to visit Israel and Turkey and Greece and Egypt and Jordan thus far. And man, there are places in each of those countries that are just some of my favorites. Probably in and around Jerusalem, there are just so many incredible sites. Everything's so close together that you can see many of the places related to Jesus and those stories in the New and Old Testament. The Mount of Olives, the Garden of Gethsemane there on the Mount of Olives is one that I certainly will not forget. We were able to kind of stand up there at one point and talk about Jesus's prayer there as we looked out on the city and saw what he must have seen. But we've also been blessed to travel through Egypt and do the best we could to recreate the path that the Israelites would have taken out of Egypt, wandering through that wilderness area. One of the potential locations of Mount Sinai, we were able to climb up there and spend the night up in the open air there on the top of the mountain and wake up to the sunrise and consider the 40 days that Moses spent up there. But we just recently returned from Israel and Turkey and Greece all in one trip, and it was my first time in Greece, so getting to see places like Corinth and Athens and retrace some of the roads, like literally walk on some of the first century roads that Paul would have walked on as he took his missionary journeys. Yeah, there were just some incredible moments that we had seeing and walking through those places that are so important in the biblical story. Yeah,
I've actually been to the place of Corinth as well myself. It's really incredible, isn't it? They still have the remains of the temple there, don't they? You can see what a pagan culture it was.
Yeah. Oh, it's unmistakable. And it's fascinating just to talk about the pressures, the cultural pressures that Christians would have had at that time, where it was all around them and so obviously so. And there's much of that still remains today that we can see.
Yeah, I found when I visited some of these places that it really shows how true the biblical text is, right? Because it doesn't take away from the narrative, it actually deepens it and expands the depth of understanding that you can have from seeing what was actually there. Did you find that as well?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I tell people it's not necessary to see it with your own eyes, but boy, it's really helpful. Whether to see it with your own eyes, if people have that opportunity, I would always encourage them to take that, or at the very least to be able to watch videos and media like the stuff that we produce with Appian Media, just to connect it to the real. The Bible is not a story of once upon a time in a land far, far away. These places were real. These people were real. The events really did happen, and our faith doesn't have to be this blind leap of faith into nothing. It's actually following the evidence that God has graciously provided for us, and taking a step of faith in the areas in which we haven't yet found evidence, but it's likely out there. We just need to keep looking.
So I really wanted to go on the tour of the 7 churches, but I never managed to get there, and that's in Turkey, right? Could you take us through what you experienced as you went round each of the different sites of these 7 churches in the Book of Revelation?
Yeah, we were blessed to take that trip. Honestly, in the midst of COVID, back in 2020, Turkey was one of the first countries to kind of open back up again, and it had initially delayed our trip, but we were able to go there in October of 2020. And there was actually a blessing to that. We were able to visit these 7 locations with very few crowds. Not a lot of people were traveling at that time, and to go to those places to read the letters that were written to them in the beginning of Revelation, like standing in Ephesus and then reading what Jesus through John communicated to that church, the warnings and the admonitions, but especially with places like Evidence. You talk about the godless idolatry that was just all around them, images of Diana and the temples that were still there, and the emperor worship, which was prevalent in almost all of these 7 locations, how they deified their governing authorities in a way that was just so difficult for the Christians at that time. And so that really was fascinating to me. Smyrna and Sardis, and we did quite a bit of hiking on that trip as well, just to get up to the heights of some of these places. And really we tried to very much ground it in the messages given to those 7 churches are very much still applicable to us today. We have similar challenges. We have similar temptations. Churches that perhaps have lost their first love, like Ephesus did, or that become so self-reliant that they think that they're strong, but really they're not, like Sardis did. And so just some incredible opportunities and incredible experiences we had. If you get the chance, I certainly would recommend. That was a memorable trip for sure.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about the Church of Laodicea as well, because aren't there some key pieces of evidence there that kind of fit with the biblical texts? For example, wasn't there a water system where you get a cold and hot that ran down together and became lukewarm, which is one of the messages that's kind of symbolized in the passage about Laodicea?
Yes. Yeah. So you can walk through the remains of that city, and they've got a very obvious sewage system. You can see how water flowed through that city. They were actually quite ingenious, even in the first century, where they pulled water from different locations to then bring it into the city. And you can go, it's not far, but you can go to higher up the elevation to a place where there's some hot springs, and we made sure to visit that. It's not there in the city, but it's nearby. And so connecting those two things together, that making the point, because I think the passage does, that cold water isn't bad and hot water good, or vice versa. But what Jesus was condemning them for is you're neither one of those things. In some instances, cold is exactly what you want. And in some instances, hot is what you need. But lukewarm water is good for nothing. And so, yeah, that was one of those opportunities where we can just kind of use the land and use the geography around us to help illustrate the point that Jesus was making in that letter.
So what do you mean when you say about cold? Because that passage used to make me think, well, surely cold is a bad thing and hot is a good thing. So what do you mean by the difference between cold and hot, and that lukewarm is the problem?
Yeah, so Jesus actually said in that text, I wish that you were either. I wish that you were either hot or cold, but you're lukewarm. And so, on a hot day, like many of the days when we're out there shooting, like you finish the day and what do you want? You want a cold, refreshing drink of water. But perhaps you're cooking and hot water, even boiling water is what you're after. But there's rarely a task or an instance where you go, you know what? I just need water that's right there in the middle. It's not good for drinking. It's not good for cooking. And so a church that's not fulfilling its purpose, a church that's not providing, not fulfilling the mission that God has given it, is not desirable to Jesus. And he uses pretty strong language to say, I'm going to spew you out of my mouth. You're not desirable to me. You're good for nothing. And so what I appreciate about Jesus in those texts with all of the 7 churches, even the ones that he's fairly critical about, it's an admonition and an encouragement. Come on, you can do better. I expect more from you. And there's benefits to obeying and changing and repenting. And again, we hoped to communicate that in our content to make it applicable to modern audiences. We're all going through similar things.
That's really great. And I've seen some of your documentaries, and they're so well produced. They really do convey that message very clearly and effectively. Do you find that you get a lot of people watching these documentaries that you put out?
Yeah, we've been really blessed over the years. I mean, when we started this 10 years ago, it was because myself and our co-founder, Stuart Peck, we were looking for this kind of content, assuming that surely someone was already doing this. And make no mistake, people were and still continue to produce documentaries about the Bible lands. But we were specifically looking for three things. We were looking for biblically accurate and historically accurate content, not coming from any kind of bias or agenda. We were looking for something that was high production value. There's plenty of videos out there that are just, well, you could tell that it's a single camera on a tripod and Jerusalem happens to be off in the distance behind them, but that's not engaging to watch. We wanted something of high production value, and we were looking for something free. And so we set out to do this thinking, well, if no one is doing exactly that, surely we can at least attempt it, not knowing that we'd ever get more than one shot at it. But over the years, our audience has found us, has come to expect more content from us. Even in the midst of COVID, as difficult of a time that was, churches and families suddenly started going online looking for this type of resource. And that's when our audience really did quite grow at quite a rate. We've probably had about 20 million views across our various platforms.
Wow. Yeah.
And the content's been seen now in at least 160 different countries. And that's really at the heart of our mission. Appian Media is the idea of it, the Appian Way, a roadway that connected all of the known world at the time, and that the Christians used to spread the gospel on an existing roadway. And so now, I mean, we live in a time we can create content, put it up online, and it's available on the other side of the planet almost instantaneously. And so we get people reaching out to us, expressing their appreciation for the content. I love it when I hear people say, I watched your content and then I went right back into the Word and I see it, with a new engagement and a new fervor and a new passion more than I have, maybe ever. Or I binge read 1 Samuel after watching your content about King David. And that's what we get excited to hear from our audiences. And I'm thankful that comes in from all corners of the world.
Yeah, and it is an exciting time, especially because there seems to be a lot more people that are looking for kind of deeper content, real history and rich spiritual truth. So it's a really great time that you're doing that as well. And also I think about the amount of discoveries that are actually happening in places like Israel in these times. It's quite a lot going on in that respect.
Yeah, even in the short time that we've been doing this, Appian Media was founded about 10 years ago, but we did a series back in 2018 about the first kings of Israel. So, Saul and David and Solomon, and there were some really exciting things happening, digs going on in Shiloh and Jerusalem. And even since 2018, there's been significant other finds that have continued to be dug up and uncovered that it almost makes us want to go back and do a new set, because things are constantly happening over there. We were told back in 2018, so I think that the statistics is still similar, but of the land of Israel, only about 5% of it has actually been adequately archaeologically dug up. So you've got 95% of that land that just hasn't been uncovered yet. And so you think about what has been found, even in just that 5%, that validates the biblical text. It is quite astounding. And man, I can't wait to see what they find in the other 95%.
What are some of the most recent findings relating to Jesus that have been discovered?
Well, I remember when we were back there in 2017, they had just started uncovering the Pool of Siloam. So there's the story of Jesus healing this man who was blind. He puts mud on his eyes and he says, "Go and wash in the pool." And on his way, as he goes to wash, he's made whole again. And they had just kind of started. They had long thought it was in another place. They actually identified something and thought that that was the pool, but they ended up realizing, no, it's actually over here, and it's much bigger than we thought. And they had uncovered the steps. Well, now in the last couple of years, they have dug farther back into it, and you are talking, once it's all finished, it's going to be close to an Olympic-sized pool area that people would have gone into Jerusalem for sacrificial cleansing and washing as they did those activities in Jerusalem. There are incredible things, like I said, still going on in Shiloh. We're in touch with the lead archaeologist there, Dr. Scott Stripling, and they're fairly confident, I believe it was this year, their most recent dig, that they have found a platform that perfectly matches the dimensions of the tabernacle, because that's where the tabernacle was kept during the time of the judges, leading up to the building of the temple, that for hundreds of years that's where people came to offer sacrifice. And they have found a platform area that marks the exact dimensions of the tabernacle there, which is super cool to think about. There's some fascinating things happening with an archaeologist there in Jerusalem, Dr. Gabriel Barkai, and he and the group there with the Temple Mount Sifting Project. There's a fascinating story about how they got some illegally acquired dirt that was then given to this group that they could then sift through and sift dirt from underneath of the Temple Mount. And so the incredible things that they're finding there in a place that, at least right now, obviously there's no active excavations going on there. And so it just, every year, there's more mikvahs being found in the city of Jerusalem and more incredible things being found to attest to the things that the Bible talks about.
And did they find anything interesting so far with the sifted dirt from under the Temple Mount?
So, this is dirt that, and we record this in our series, Searching for a King. We actually tell the story of at the time, under the excuse of digging out an emergency exit, those in charge of the Temple Mount dug into it, and they should not have. It was against international law, but truckloads and truckloads of dirt, not a controlled archaeological dig, mind you. And so it's all churned up, and it's all small pieces. You're not going to find large pots. You're not going to find, big pieces. But what they are finding are small pieces, that coins and things that attest to a Jewish presence there on the top of Temple Mount. You're talking about small tiles and tessera that were evidence of quite a presence that was there up on Temple Mount prior to the structures that are currently there. And so nothing definitive. There isn't anything that they have found that says, King David was here, but they are finding things that do attest to the fact that there was a significant amount of traffic and presence there, Hebrew presence there up on the Temple Mount.
Yeah, because I've seen a artist's impression from, I think it was from the 1800s, that was a drawing of the underneath the Temple Mount, because I think they used to be allowed to go under there before a certain time period. And there was like pictures of huge cisterns underneath the Temple Mount. Mm-hmm. Is that true? Is that where they would have kept the water for the cleaning the temple compound with the sacrifices, do you think?
Yeah, very likely. I'm certainly not an expert when it comes to what's underneath, because I have not been able to. But just keeping in mind, when we talk about the Temple Mount, you're talking about a man-made platform, and it's massive, like multiple football fields large of a platform. And then, right now you've got the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock and things built on top of this platform. Well, that platform isn't perfectly solid. There's stuff underneath of that, and there are rooms and things. It's just not, most of it is not publicly available, and none of it is currently available to archaeologists.
Yeah, and that's because of Jordan's control over that compound, isn't it?
Currently, yeah. It's a complicated situation there, and our team has been very blessed to be able to get up there, and people can visit there, and tourists can go up there and view it. But it's a delicate situation, and you need to be mindful of the current culture up there. But we're thankful to have gotten photos and videos and things up there, and to talk about, what was up there and where it would have been located compared to the modern structures.
What causes some confusion, I've noticed sometimes with people, can be that the Western Wall is not actually a wall of the temple, because obviously that was completely destroyed as Jesus prophesied, but it's part of a retaining wall that King Herod built to expand the platform, because he was he enjoyed big building projects.
Yes. Oh, yes, that's correct. So the Western Wall, you are 100% correct. That's not the wall of the temple. No. I mean, when Jesus predicted it, and he was right, come 70 AD, Rome did come in and level the buildings that were on the platform, right? So not a stone was left upon another. In fact, you can go to what's called the Davidson Center. It's a place where they have done some really fascinating archaeological work right around the base of the Temple Mount. And they've uncovered first century steps. They've uncovered mikvahs, places of ritual cleansing. They've uncovered the agora, a marketplace, steps that would have led up to the temple structure. And there you can see, you're basically standing and looking up at the platform. And so that is what the Western Wall is. You're looking up at the platform where the temple, at least part of the temple buildings would have stood.
And have you seen, there's also a house in Jerusalem they found called the Burnt House, and it's part of one of the ancient first century houses that you can still see the burn marks in the bricks from where the Romans came and just torched the city.
Yes. Yeah, I got a look at that just briefly when we were there most recently, but I've read some articles. You can also still very much see the giant stones that were literally pushed off of that mount and just left, bus-sized, tons and tons, the weight of these stones that are just cratered. Rome was not messing around when they destroyed that temple and took it apart brick by brick, stone by stone. And so, the destruction is still evident. It's still there. And, I find that faith affirming. Jesus said that it would happen long before it did. And it was fulfilled exactly as he said.
Yeah, it's incredible to see. And as you said, so faith affirming. I found that when I visited Jerusalem and some of these places, it was just such a huge, it has such a huge impact on your Christian walk, doesn't it? And so it's really important you're showing people this. I was also going to ask you, in terms of Jerusalem and the evidence for Jesus, have you seen any others of the places? For example, there's Caiaphas's house, where there's an underground prison. Have you seen that?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, so that was our first series. The very first trip that we took, we said, look, if we've only got one shot at this, we're going to tell the story of Jesus. But it involved 2 trips over to Israel. So we created 10 episodes. It's almost 4 hours worth of content. And we tried to hit every location that we could, every location that was available, to discuss the life of Jesus from infancy to his ascension. And so, yes, there's a house that's been identified. Right now, there's a church basically on top of what was a first century house, which was on top of what was a prison. That this was very likely the house of Caiaphas, the high priest, the one involved with trying and convicting Jesus. And so when the scriptures talk about Jesus being held, waiting for the following day where he would then be taken before Herod and Pilate, he would have been held down very likely in a place like this. And so that was sobering. I mean, you go down there and it's quiet and it's eerie, and you don't know for sure this was exactly where Jesus was held, but there are plenty of options to choose from. It's also very sobering. There are places where the prisoners would have been held, and there are troughs where blood would have been washed out, because we read about them being scourged and mistreated, which Jesus certainly was for us. And so to stand in a place like that and consider, even before the excruciating experience of the crucifixion, he was going through incredible things, difficult things for us. Yeah, we were able to visit that location.
And this shows it, doesn't it? The house is quite close to the Temple Mount. You can see it from the house. And yes, it seems to match that it could be where Caiaphas lived. And that underground prison is just like, was that a cistern as well that was converted into a prison? It's kind of like an underground cell, isn't it, underneath the house, the ruins?
Yes, I believe it did serve a couple of different purposes. And so some of them did appear like, yeah, it could have been a cistern at one time. One of the reasons why they're fairly confident that it was the house of the high priest is it basically had its own private mikvahs outside. Like, most people didn't have their own pools for ritual cleansing in their front yard, but this one certainly did. And yeah, it was close enough to the Temple Mount to make sense that was where he was being held.
That's great. Thank you so much for covering these. It's really interesting, to dig into. As you say, these things, they bring the Bible to life. And you mentioned you went to Egypt. Mm-hmm. So with Egypt, there's some people that have said they've found the site of the Exodus, and there's other people that say, well, no, that's not the correct mountain. The mountain was here. So from your view and what you've seen in person, what is the most likely route of the Exodus, and what did you see?
This one was very challenging. Unlike the story of Jesus, where we know exactly where Bethlehem was, and we know exactly where Capernaum was. We know where the Sea of Galilee is. The story of the Exodus, obviously it happened longer ago than that, and it involved a nomadic people who traveled through the wilderness and didn't build cities along the way. Like, there aren't as many telltale signs as you would find as with, like, the story of Jesus. And so we knew very early on when we started this project that we were not going to be able to plant flags of certainty as much as we had with the story of Jesus. But starting with their slavery in Egypt, for obvious reasons, Egyptian history doesn't account for it. That's not something that, the pharaohs are going to write about and brag about. Hey, we kept this nomadic people for 400 years in slavery and mistreated them. But you can go to places that would be marked as what the Bible calls the land of Goshen. Avaris is one of these places where you can see evidence where a Semitic people, very likely the Hebrews, lived and thrived even under slavery in this area. Where did they cross the Red Sea, and where is the mountain? We understood very early on that debate has been raging for hundreds of years, especially since the advent of YouTube and some videos that, in my opinion, and opinions of scholars, kind of sensationalize the hunt for the mountain. Suggestions that it is in Saudi Arabia are relatively new suggestions. The site that's being proposed in Saudi Arabia is not something that was seriously considered even 50 years ago. Our decision as Appian Media was not to create a documentary where we planted a lot of flags and said definitively, even among our own team, I think there was not a 100% consensus. I'll just tell you, for me personally, when I read the biblical text, it doesn't say the coordinates for Mount Sinai was here and here and here. But what the Bible does say, if you look at the chronology of the story and of the narrative and the time that it would have taken for certain events to happen. For example, the Hebrews were released from Egypt after the 10th plague. They fled. Pharaoh changes his mind and goes after them. But it's only after Pharaoh hears that they are out in the wilderness by the Red Sea. So which part did they cross, the western side or the eastern side? Because if you believe that the site of Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia, you have to believe that first they wandered all the way through the wilderness to get to the eastern side of the Red Sea. Pharaoh heard that they were wandering. Somehow that message got all the way back to Egypt, where he heard they were wandering. He said they've gotten themselves lost in the wilderness. He then gets his chariots, and chariots then go through the entirety of the Sinai Peninsula desert straight across to the eastern side where they cross, it stops making sense. The Bible doesn't account for the fact that it doesn't not seem to indicate that Israel waited what would have been weeks, if not over a month, sitting there by the Red Sea waiting for the message to get to Pharaoh to come back. And so it seems to indicate much more that they crossed the site of the Red Sea that was closest to Egypt. Therefore, after they cross, they then encounter Mount Sinai. And so I'm of the opinion that it is likely a mountain somewhere in the Sinai Peninsula, whether it's exactly Jabal Musa, which is kind of the traditional site, the one that's longest held to be. When you look probably in the map at the back of your Bible, that's what it's going to say it is. That seems to carry more weight as far as distance and time when you think about the biblical narrative. For those that do really strongly believe, and I've met some people and I do respect them, who believe it's in Saudi Arabia, most of their rationale seems to rely on the visuals of the place. It looks more like what I imagined. There's a much more even plain out there where I imagined the people would be. Well, there are many times, and we proved this with our story of Jesus in Israel and covering the gospel story, that oftentimes the visuals that we have in our imagination do not actually match the place themselves. Where Jesus was born in Bethlehem was not in a barn, as many of us imagined, at least I did in my childhood. It was more likely a cave. And so just because I imagined that it picturesquely looks really nice out there in Saudi Arabia, it doesn't seem to match the distance and the time, in my humble opinion. So, Appian Media doesn't want to end the debate. We were not actually even keen to enter the debate. We talk about it in our video. We show a map and say, believe it or not, there's like 12 different sites that have been proposed to be the site. We wanted to spend more time discussing what the Bible discusses. I feel like if God really wanted us to know exactly where the mountain was, he would have been very specific. He does that sometimes in the biblical text. The Valley of Elah, where David fought Goliath, the Bible spends 3 or 4 verses very specifically narrowing down, based on the cities nearby, exactly where that valley took place. God wanted us to know. With Mount Sinai, he was very obscure about it. But what the text does do is for many chapters spend talking about what God said to Moses and the people on the mountain and why that was so significant for the people. So our documentary spent much more time discussing the covenant that was made on the mountaintop, discussing the people's rebellion while they impatiently waited for Moses during those 40 days. And that's what we hope audiences come away from with our documentary is the debate will continue to rage, I'm sure of it, for probably hundreds more of years. But what we shouldn't be debating, because God made it abundantly clear, is what God did for his people there on the mountain and what God expects us to do with the similar knowledge of him.
Do you think that may be why the details aren't always specific at certain times, because the narrative is meant to point us to what is the primary meaning of it rather than the extra details?
I'm convinced of it because it's interesting. We visit all of these sites around the world that are historically significant, and it's impactful to go and to see and to touch these places. But I've also seen what humanity tends to do with those places. I have witnessed people, in all sincerity and devotion, essentially worship the place. They bow down and they kiss the stones. And they hold their hands on the walls and they pray and they cry because of the place. That was never God's intention. We are not to worship the place or the thing. We're not to worship the creation. We're to worship God. And so there's so many details that, boy, I wish I knew, and I wish the Bible gave to us. But you have to step back and go, okay, what did God choose to reveal, and why all of this emphasis? He left the details of their path and the details of that mountain fairly obscure, in my humble opinion. But he spent so much time clearly communicating what his covenant promise to his people was and what he expected of them and his love for them. And so we ought to focus on that, I think, more than the speculation, as much fun as it is to do sometimes.
Thank you so much for explaining these things. It's been really interesting to hear you talk about them. And where do people find your media? By the way, it's wonderful that you're doing it for free, that people can watch it for free. It's just, that's such a light in the darkness.
Yeah, we set out from the very beginning to make that a part of our mission. And so we became a non-for-profit very early on. We're supported by individuals who believe in this mission and want to see more of this content made available. And we raise the funds. And to produce international documentaries about the Bible is not a cheap endeavor, but there are some incredibly generous people out there, hundreds of them, who support the work and allow us to, when the new content comes out, it's free of charge. You can watch it on our website at appianmedia.org. You can also just search for us on YouTube. That's where our largest audience is. Appian Media, right there on YouTube. All of our videos, our podcasts, we do quite a bit of behind the scenes as well. We want people to share with us on the journey, how these things are made. Those are all available there on the website and on YouTube. And if people are inclined, we encourage people they can make a donation right there on the website as well.
And have you ever had any of them shown on TV as well, or is it more online?
Yeah, the vast majority of it is online, but through a variety of streaming partners. So we make it available for free on pretty much those two platforms, our website and on YouTube. But other streaming platforms have approached us, and we typically make our content available through licensing. Some of them have, not so much in our country, but quite a bit internationally, satellite TV stations and others that are running our content and showing them sometimes even in different languages.
And for those listening, please do check out Craig's Appian Media and the group that are making the wonderful content there, really professional looking as well, using high-end cameras, and it's just really engaging. And if anyone has any relatives maybe that are searching for answers in this time, I encourage you to send the content to them and let them see the truth of the Bible come to life.
Are you searching for a podcast that discusses the most important issues of our day, all from a Christian perspective? Then add Rise Radio to your podcast playlist. Rise Radio explores topics that are shaping our world: philosophies, social narratives, belief systems, prophecies, strange phenomena, as well as spirituality. No topic is off limits. Rise Radio is about sharing the good news of Jesus Christ across the planet. Listen now on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, Buzzsprout, and wherever you get your podcast. Rise above the noise. Discover the truth. Tune into Rise Radio on your favorite podcast player right now.